Well, happy Saturday, Karen.
Thanks, Rob.
It's been good having you in the office this week.
Yeah, it's been nice to be here just to try and get things caught up and worked around with Pete gone now, and just to make our functioning a little smoother.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you came up. We had a presentation for the Ponderosa Women's Club in Spokane. I think that was went pretty well, pretty successful. Got to meet some new people and share our message about medical freedom up there.
Yeah, it was good. It was nice to be able to get out there and really let people know in Spokane what we're doing and the successes we've had, and the continuing issues that we face. So
Right. So, and then you got an important date on Monday coming up here too.
yes, I am doing a deposition in the La Center case, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit more later, but that'll be an important deposition. And so been working on that all week.
Yeah, you're grinding away, but I was able to tear you away from that work for a little bit today to give us an update, share with our members and donors and people that are following along with the work. So thank you for taking your time. But I wanted to take this time too because we've had you on podcast a couple times, at different points in the work we've done, and you and I did another one while you were away in Oklahoma, talking about the Wilkinson case, which I think we're going to talk about here too. But I wanted to take this chance to reintroduce you to our donors and followers because you have been recently appointed to the board now, correct?
That is true. I am. I have been. I think my title is legal board director, legal director.
Director of legal, I think is how we
Director
have
of
you
legal.
put that
Okay.
on.
Yeah, so it's new enough that I haven't even memorized that yet. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to helping the foundation with all of that. Pete was really involved in that aspect of it previously, and so we needed someone to take his place, and you guys chose me, and I really am honored that you did.
We're happy and glad to have you to be able to fill in that spot for now and guide the legal work that we're doing so far. We were kind of worried about that for a little bit, but we're grateful that you stepped up into that. And Pete has been very busy. Of course, the process there, it goes through the Senate, and at this point, he still has not been confirmed, but we still have our fingers crossed that that's what's going to happen so he can continue to do the good work he's been doing as the U.S. Attorney. But great. So you're now as a director of legal for the foundation. But I wanted to maybe dig into your history a little bit. Maybe you can share with us a little bit about your why. I think Pete and I share our why and have shared our why quite a bit. But we want to know what Karen's why is. Why have you joined the fight that we have chosen to fight?
Well, I have always been very independent-minded. I was married young, we had children, and when it was time for our children to go to school, I chose to homeschool them because I wanted to raise them, I wanted to educate them, and I wanted to imbue them with the values that I had and help them to understand why the values our country enshrined are so important, as particularly as it pertains to our constitutional rights. So I homeschooled my 4 children, and after that, then I went to law school, specifically so I could do constitutional work. That's not an easy thing to do. It's not finding places where you can focus on that work is very difficult, particularly from a more originalist standpoint. And the foundation ultimately gave me that opportunity in ways that no place else would. So I really appreciate the opportunity to stand up for the people's rights as they are enshrined in the Constitution.
Yeah. Was there anything specifically within the Constitution or any of the rights that you more appealed to, or is it overall the Constitution and blessings that it brings to the country as it was written.
Well, so obviously the Bill of Rights, all of them are important, but the First Amendment is the First Amendment for a reason. Without the 5 rights enshrined in the First Amendment, we are not free people. And it is those rights that keep us free, especially the protection and the exercise of those rights. And so I have focused by and large on the First Amendment, though it's certainly not the only amendment that I'm happy to and excited to defend, because there are many other very important rights throughout the Bill of Rights. A right to a jury trial isn't extremely important, and so I would be happy to defend that right. The Second Amendment obviously is extremely important. Happy to defend that right. Every single right needs to be defended if we are to retain our ability to exercise them.
So we've defended the Second Amendment. Largely, we have Austin working those cases, but that has a special place in your heart too. Your husband does something that aligns with the Second Amendment. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That is true. My husband actually has developed from the ground up and manufactures a concealed carry pistol. It's a pistol, I guess the gun people would call it a deep concealed pistol, because it folds up such that the barrel telescopes in and out as it folds. And when it's folded up, it cannot be fired. It's not possible for it to fire. So it can be carried in the pocket or a purse very, very safely. And he's selling that now and has been for a couple years, really doing a slow ramp of it, but it is proving to be popular, and we have a hard time keeping up with demand.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I mean, I'm a gun enthusiast and own my share of different platforms of guns. I really am intrigued by this one because it truly is a gun with a very, very specific purpose in self-defense.
Right.
Very clearly is designed and used for that. And we all know that that's just one aspect of why the Second Amendment is important, but self-defense is clearly one of those things that's very important. And from my perspective, I want my wife to be able to walk around and feel comfortable and secure in her person, and then my daughters as they grow as well. And that, I think, is what your husband's providing, is an option for them to be able to carry something very securely, very discreetly, and give them that sense of confidence and self-protection.
Right. The female market is really what he's targeting. He had a cousin's daughter who was raped twice in her own home. The guy was recidivist, and he ended up going on after being released from jail to rape several other women after her, and I presume ended up back in jail. But in the process, he has damaged many lives, and it got my husband wondering, how can we put kind of put these people on notice, these criminals on notice, that you're not going to get away without having somebody stand up to them. And just getting more people to carry is one way to do that, so that they can't be sure that this woman that they're going after can't defend herself. So that really was one of the goals in creating this product, and hopefully more women will begin to get interested in it.
Well, we're definitely glad that people like your husband exist and think that way and are trying to solve those kind of problems in the world, because as the country stands right now, we're not sure that the government really is interested in preserving law and order and protecting the people. In fact, today is, I believe, the No Kings protest today, and our governor has turned it into a protest of Donald Trump wanting law and order to be restored to Washington State, and specifically is asking people to protest any kind of military activity in the Washington. And of course, none of us want military activity in Washington. But more than not wanting that, we want the law and order to be returned. We want to feel safe in our cities and everything. So, like I said, I'm grateful that there are people like your husband that are thinking about that, because we can't always depend on, a benevolent government to do that for us.
Well, and the founders knew that that was true. That was part of the purpose of the Second Amendment, right? Was that we were the first line of defense. And we were the first line of defense against criminals as well as against a tyrannical government. So it is an important right that we should all be considering exercising. And my husband hopes that by developing this gun, it's going to encourage more people to exercise that right.
Yeah, I think he's onto something there. Like I said, I'm pretty excited about it and hope to get one in my wife's hands eventually too. Now, we wanted to talk about the last time you and I spoke on a podcast. We talked about a huge First Amendment win for Dr. Wilkinson. We were both pretty excited about the implications of that and where we're going from that. But there's been some progress in that case. You want to give us some updates?
Yeah, so it was Thursday was the final day for either party to submit an appeal to the Supreme Court of Washington. And of course, the state did submit an appeal to the Supreme Court of Washington. It's a request for discretionary review. The Washington Supreme Court does not have to review the case. They get to decide whether they want to review the case. The state is asking them to review the case because it believes that it has a more fundamental right to regulate everything a doctor does, in essence, relative to medicine of any kind, including speech, and that right is more fundamental than the right of the doctor to speak. That's the essence of why they're appealing. And it's telling about the attitude toward fundamental rights in Washington.
It's interesting to me, and while I was off camera, I grabbed this case. So when this paper magically appeared, that's what's going on. That they're trying to get a review of this when this decision was so clearly in our favor. And I think this is the sentence that we highlighted last time. The judges, as a whole, says we adopt these First Amendment arguments of Dr. Richard Wilkinson wholesale.
Correct. They completely repudiated all of the arguments that the state made. And it wasn't as though it was just two of the three judges that did this. They all signed on to the opinion, all three of them. And the concurrence makes it clear that at least Judge Fearing does not agree in the least politically with Dr. Wilkinson. Nonetheless, he was willing to put those political biases aside and follow the law and uphold our right to speak and doctors' rights to speak. Yet the state believes that he is incorrect in his assessment regarding the right of free speech.
Right, and in that concurrence, he said, "Our nation adopted the First Amendment to ensure unfettered interchange of ideas for the generation of political and social changes desired by the people."
Correct.
So what exactly are they asking for a review of?
It's the same argument they've made the whole time. They're claiming that Dr. Wilkinson's speech was commercial speech, and they're claiming that because it was commercial speech, they have the right to regulate everything he says, and that it should only go face, at the most, intermediate scrutiny, although they think it should be rational basis. The interesting about Judge Fearing's opinion here is that he actually concluded that they didn't even have a rational basis for this.
Let me use this quote here.
Yeah, so the Supreme Court has not recognized a legitimate government interest in the regulation of physician speech outside of the physician-patient relationship. That legitimate interest is under rational basis review. That's the wording of rational basis review. So what Judge Fearing is saying here is that they don't have a legitimate interest. He's also saying that they don't have a substantial government interest, because the sentence before that says the commission cites no case law recognizing the government has a substantial government interest in protecting the public from physician speech, whether false or not, or preserving the integrity of the profession by regulating such speech. That is intermediate scrutiny. So regardless of the level of scrutiny, Judge Fearing is saying they don't meet it.
Right. Right, and I like this part to his quote. WMC provides no authority supporting its postulation of a long tradition of regulating false speech by physicians outside of the physician-patient relationship. To the contrary, we have analyzed decisions that express concern about regulating physician speech, even if the speech advocates for treatments not generally accepted by the medical community.
Correct. And that's a Ninth Circuit case. That's the Conant case that discusses pot and the use of pot in medical treatment, which at the time a doctor could not prescribe, was not allowed to prescribe, and yet the Ninth Circuit found that a doctor could talk to a patient about it.
Right.
Couldn't prescribe it, but could talk to a patient about it.
Right.
So it's pretty astounding that the Washington Medical Commission believes that the Supreme Court is going to overturn all of that law, because that is federal law, which is the floor that they have to uphold.
Right.
They can't, in other words, they have to protect speech at least to that level. The Washington State Supreme Court cannot protect speech less than that. And so there's no basis upon which the Washington Supreme Court can find that Dr. Wilkinson's speech was not protected.
But yet they want to challenge it.
Yes. Yes, and they are challenging it, right, which is astounding to me. I am still trying to figure out what the Washington Medical Commission is trying to accomplish.
Well, in my experience, and what I've observed with what's the Washington Medical Commission, and this is longstanding and not just in the last several years, they feel like they have the ultimate power. They run the court as if they have the ultimate power, their court, and they will not give up. They will dog a physician or medical provider until they have accomplished their ends of essentially just ruining their practice, ruining their way of providing for themselves. And this is my opinion, is that what the Washington Medical Commission is ultimately trying to accomplish in Washington is socialized healthcare, where everything is run through a public-private partnership with these large hospitals, that private practice no longer exists, and that alternative medicine is something that is squashed out completely.
And that's likely true. But I think the issue, all of that, points to a more fundamental issue. And that is that they believe that states have rights. The facts are states do not have rights. States are granted powers. Individuals have rights. And the Washington Medical Commission is asking the Washington State Supreme Court to review this case on the idea that the state's right to the police power is more fundamental than the individual's right to free speech. That is a complete misstatement and misunderstanding of what our constitutional protections are.
It's interesting that we gave that presentation specifically on medical freedom on Tuesday, and as we prepared that, I couldn't help but think about how everything that we're fighting on the front of medical freedom is related to every other overreach or overstep in the government as far as our rights are concerned. And it's almost like they have no imagination or innovation at the state level, because their argument always comes back to it's for the greater good or it's for the public good. And when it comes to a Second Amendment argument or it comes to a First Amendment
Right.
argument, whatever it is they're arguing, it's always this: we know what's best for people. We know what's best for you individually.
Right.
You have to appeal to us as the authority. And you're absolutely right. They think that they have those rights to do that.
But all they've been granted are powers based on rights that we say, okay, we are going to allow you to regulate to this extent, right? This is a power. It is not a right, and that power is limited according to the constitutions both of Washington State and the United States. When a state or any government decides that it has a right, what it's doing is usurping the God-given rights of individuals. It cannot do that because the rights begin with us. We grant the state power. That's it. And the state can only exercise that power to the extent that we've granted it.
So that leads us to, how do we hold the state accountable? What are the checks that we have as people? And I think that's what, as an organization, we're trying to educate people about where their checks on the power lie.
Right. And so that's part of the reason why we are litigating, right? Because that is one way that we go to the courts and we say, look, here is the issue, and here is the extent of the power that the people granted to the state. The state is usurping the rights of the people rather than exercising the power to the extent granted, right? That's the fundamental argument that we always make. Now, we may not make it in those specific words because we have to use case law and so on and so forth, but that is the fundamental argument we're always making. That is the fundamental argument upon which we won at the appeals court in this case. And that is the fundamental argument we will continue to make. If the Washington State Supreme Court decides that the Washington State has the power to regulate speech in this way, it will have to be taken to the United States Supreme Court. I don't think it's going to come to that, but if it does, we'll have no choice because we do have to protect those rights. And this is one way in which we do that. Other ways in which we do that, obviously, is through legislation, through referendum, and those kinds of activities, as well as exercising our rights on a regular basis. The exercise of rights is fundamentally important because if we forget to exercise those rights, we forget that we have those rights and what the basis of those rights are.
Right. It's interesting, growing up, I don't think I can recall, maybe other than one time, the school district employees had a protest or picket line. I think they were striking, and that was the only time I ever saw a picket line. I was confused about what that was. And now it seems like over the last 5 years, there's a constant protest, and we're constantly exercising that right to protest.
Well, and the interesting thing is that teachers don't actually have the right to that protest. They are not legally supposed to strike. And they're not legally supposed to strike because we have granted them power as state employees, and as state employees, they can only exercise that power. And that power does not include the power to strike based on what they think their rights as teachers are. This is another fundamental issue we have right now in our education system. And that is that teachers believe they have the rights to dictate how parents are, the information parents are allowed to have about their students, when in fact what teachers are the agents of those parents. Therefore, they are not allowed any more information about students than parents are, because parents have the fundamental right to that information about their students, right, and about their children. And that, and then on top of that, the children have the right to the nurture, care, and discipline and education that their parents offer them. They do not have the children do not have the right to the nurture, care, and discipline that and education that teachers offer them. They only have that secondarily through the parents. When the teachers think that they are the fundamental person in a student's life, they have overstepped their power again.
I think we morphed into from medical freedom into the parental rights conversation a little sooner than we want to, but I think it's perfect. I think you're exactly right. And to my point earlier about all these things really tie into what the state is trying to do. And it's not, these aren't individual issues. This is what the state is doing. They are overstepping their power.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Correct.
And so tell us, you made a great definition of where, what a teacher's and student relationship should be and where the parent has authority over that relationship. Tell us why you're pointing at that so specifically. What's going on right now?
Yeah, so I'm sure everybody is aware of the transgender issues in schools and the fact that Washington has written into law that transgender students cannot be discriminated against or harassed and so on and so forth, and that transgender students and what they call gender expansive students now are considered a protected class, just like race, sex, and so on and so forth. So OSPI has created a model policy to protect these transgender students that they insist each district adopt. Part of this policy is that school districts, teachers, principals, and so forth are not supposed to tell parents what's going on with these transgender students unless the transgender students say they can. Now, this is a real problem for a lot of these districts because this information needs to go into the record, the student record, and the student record is available to the parents. So the Center School District created the policy and said, okay, we will protect these students, but we are not going to keep this information from parents. As a result, the Center School District OSPI has decided that La Center School District is discriminating against transgender students. That's fundamentally what's going on with that. And so this is one of the depositions I'm preparing for, is the investigator that came up with this conclusion that La Center is discriminated simply because their policy is to say, yeah, parents get to know this stuff unless there's a clear reason to claim that the parents would be a danger to the child. And so we are defending La Center in this.
So you have the deposition on Monday. what comes after that as far as with the center? What are we trying to accomplish for them?
So,
And I ask that because typically when we take a case, and we've explained this before, but typically as a foundation, we look at a case and it's universal applications. You know, what
right.
is this going to do for the other school districts that are facing the same issue? You know, in with being basically stuck between what the federal government is mandating and what the state now is mandating.
Right. So, really, what we're trying to do through this is the same thing La Center is trying to do, and that is to say parents have the right to the information about their students. So, the parental rights initiative that was passed and has been changed through the legislature. We won't get into the details of that, but essentially, La Center is saying parents do have fundamental rights, and we need to support those fundamental rights and not try to subvert those fundamental rights in our district. So that is a big part of what we're trying to do, is to show that districts are not defying the law by allowing parents the information about their students. The other part of this is that La Center has told teachers, you shouldn't be asking what students generally, the whole class, what pronouns they would like to use. And OSPI has said, oh, well, that's discriminatory, because then you don't get to find out which students are transgender and make sure that you're using the proper pronouns for those transgender students, which is a complete misstatement. All they're saying is that the teachers shouldn't be actively asking every student what their pronoun is. What they're saying is that if a student says, my pronoun is different, then use that pronoun, right? It's giving the student the opportunity to lead in this, rather than telling the students that they ought to be stating this up front and that they have to tell a person in authority exactly what they think about this, which to me is just common sense, right? As an adult, I am not going to write on my name tag she, her. I'm not going to write on my name tag, my pronouns are. I am not going to put on a sheet of paper, my pronouns are. It's ludicrous. I do not need to do that, and I will not comply with that. Students should not be made to comply with that either. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't do it. It just means that they shouldn't be forced to do it.
Right. Well, the other thing that, from a parental perspective and from my perspective, is I feel like when a teacher brings that discussion into a class, which I think isn't appropriate completely, because a classroom should be about learning the basics and learning academics, and it's strictly academic. But when they bring that idea into a classroom, it opens a discussion about something that's ideological, and these kids are very much, shapeable and moldable, and the influence that a teacher has in that classroom in that position of authority can really confuse children. And I've seen it in my own children and in my nieces and nephews and in friends. These teachers, by bringing this conversation into what should be an academic environment where these kids are supposed to trust that what is being presented to them is factual, is actual, is reality. Now they're bringing ideas that are not, and that go beyond what the facts are.
Well, and why are they doing it? That is the question you have to ask, right? Are they doing it for the benefit of the children? I don't think so. I think they're doing it because it makes them feel good, right? For whatever reason, they think that this is an essential conversation for a teacher to have with a child. I don't understand that issue at all. Again, the teacher is the agent of the parent. If that conversation needs to be had, It should be had with the parent, not with the child. The teacher is usurping the parent's right and the child's right by insisting that conversation be had with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just absurd. They are taking power they have not been given again.
Right. And so I think we've looked at this case and looked at where's the ground that we can fall on here. Where do you think the center school district will be happy? Where do you think OSPI will concede to? What do you think the outcome is going to be here?
Well, at this point, OSPI doesn't want to concede to anything. What they want to force the center to do is to accept their model policy verbatim without any change. That is not what the law says, but that is what they expect. We are saying La Center has followed the law, but that doesn't require a verbatim acceptance of the policy.
Right.
And so that is where we are trying to get OSPI to come to, that these school districts have the right to modify as necessary for their particular school district the elements that the model policy puts forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that they don't include those elements. It just means that they make those elements serve their district.
Right. Now, I'm maybe putting you on the spot a little bit here, and I don't know if you've done the research or found this. When did we cede the right to the state agency and OSPI to write policy for our individual school districts? When did that happen?
So that is actually written in the law. OSPI has the overall authority to determine what education looks like in the state. And that the districts then have to adopt the essential educational standards that OSPI comes up with, right? Now, the question is this transgender policy even an educational standard? The only reason it's considered an educational standard is because the legislature has decided that the Human Rights Commission laws apply to schools, and that schools are places of public not accountability, but that's close. The word is escaping me. And so the schools have to comply with everything, and they have adopted what generally applies to adults to make it apply to children. It's a very convoluted way of thinking about what schools are and what the standards that OSPI ought to have power over and what those limitations of those standards ought to be. It's convoluted and expanded to this point where it's usurping everybody's rights.
So I think what you're saying there is something that we've seen time and time again, is that when the people at large are not actively engaged in what the legislature is doing, we find outcomes like this.
Exactly. It goes beyond what the legislature is doing, too, because clearly the people at large passed the initiative, the Parental Right Bill, the Parents' Bill of Rights.
Right.
But then the legislature went and changed it drastically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they decide, it's not constitutional. Well, the changes they've made probably are less constitutional than what the original Bill of Rights was. So it's not just that the people haven't been involved. Through the initiative process, they were involved.
Mm-hmm.
It's that they're electing people who think they have more power to determine what is good for them than the people themselves have. It's the actual elected officials that are the problem right now. I mean, and what the answer to that is, well, you have to get out there and vote to begin with. But it's very difficult in Washington where, in general, a conservative on the west side can't get more than 46 to 48% of the vote. If a conservative gets that much of the vote, they have done extraordinarily well on the west side. So there are a lot of other fixes that could happen, but it would take actual constitution overturning of Supreme Court precedent and then changing the Constitution in order that states aren't run solely by the big cities. That is the fundamental issue right now.
So without getting into too much election law and theory, you made a point there. So how would we be redistricting? Would it be what would it be that would allow us to balance the power, so to speak?
Well, so if we could go back about, it would be about 75 years now, almost 75 years now. If we could go back, originally the states, the senators essentially represented the counties, right? So it's very similar to the federal system, where the senators represent each state, regardless of what the population in that state is, right? Mm-hmm. It was the same way in the states. Almost every state had it so that the senators represented the counties. And what does that do? That balances out the power between the urban and rural areas.
Right.
So that would be the ultimate answer to this, but that would require overturning 75 years of Supreme Court precedent.
So just for clarity, so basically there was a system, and this is before my time, so I wouldn't know. There was essentially an electoral college in the state where each county had its own vote for the senator. Well, no,
there was more of the system, the system between the legislature and the Senate in the federal government, where the legislature actually represents the populations in each state, and so each state gets a different number of legislators,
gotcha.
Right, in the House. Mm-hmm. And in the Senate, each state gets 2 senators, so that the states have equal power in the Senate.
Right.
But the populations are represented in the House of Representatives, right?
Right.
It was the same way in the states, where the lower legislative body mm-hmm. actually represented the population centers, right? And was district according to population. But the upper legislative body represented the counties, or whatever the equivalent of county was in each state, right? That pretty much held true until the 1950s. That's the way it was. And then in the 1950s, the one man, one vote line of Supreme Court cases started coming down. And the result was that ultimately the Supreme Court held that each state, the Senate, had to represent the population as well as the lower house. Mm-hmm. So what did that do? That gave the cities, the states with big cities, gave the cities all the power. This is what we see in Washington.
Right.
King County and Seattle has all the power. If that were to change, then these issues would be easier for the people to step up and say, no, you are not going to do that. Right now, the cities control all of it.
Which makes, when you centralize that power, it makes it a lot easier for bad actors, whether it be people with large amounts of money or corporations with a large amount of money and power, to come in and corrupt and control that situation as well.
Well, that is one issue. But the other issue, frankly, is that for whatever reason, and I think there are a lot of reasons, sociological reasons behind this, cities tend to be more liberal because cities are dependent on every place else in the state for their food production, for a wide variety of things, right?
Right.
And so the city dwellers tend to think that they are entitled to everybody else's labor one way or another. And so they tend to be very liberal. That is one sociological issue that you find, is that the cities all over the country,
Right.
tend to be very liberal. And I think this is one of the reasons why. This is one of the reasons why Jefferson said we should remain an agrarian economy, because the people who lived off of the land tended to understand how to sustain themselves and tended to understand where their sustenance came from. The people in the cities do not. They have never had to deal with that.
Right.
So that was one reason why Jefferson warned about that issue. And I think we are seeing the results of that very issue.
I think so too. I think that there are a lot of things that are broken or, have broken over time, and that it is up to us to fix.
Yeah, I think that fixing this particular problem is going to be such a heavy lift. I don't see it happening anytime soon.
No, I think that's a monumental lift. I absolutely do. But the message that we want to share and spread is that there is something that we can do. And if no one starts, the change will never happen.
Right.
Right.
I mean, one thing that COVID did was that it drove a lot of people out into the country, right? It drove a lot of people out of the cities and into more property, more land, so more people are becoming more agrarian-minded, so to speak. Now they just need to start using their voices once they've woken up and realized, oh, okay, I understand this now. That will help a lot. That alone will help.
Right. Yeah, I think so too. Well, I think we've covered the topics we intended on covering today.
And maybe
a little bit more. Anything else that you want to add? Any other updates or anything? Any message you want to leave with our followers?
No, I don't. I think that we've covered it, but I do appreciate everybody who's supporting and following, and I just look forward to our next, the next moves we have in all of these cases, and hope that you follow along.
Yep. We have a lot going on, a lot of cases. That's why we haven't been able to be as active on the podcast and updating with what's going on. But be on the lookout for our end-of-year messages and newsletters. And we continue to fundraise and know that it is because of people like you that we're able to do the work that we do. And we are so grateful for our supporters and donors, and want to thank you very sincerely for that and everything that you do for us. And thank you, Karen, for coming and spending time up here and kind of taking up the mantle right now and filling in and making this work possible, because we know it is an important work, and if we don't get it done, nobody else will.
Well, I love doing it, and I just really would like to see it continue to grow and become more pervasive, that more people are taking on this kind of work.
For sure. And we invite you all to go to our website at silentmajorityfoundation.org. Follow our work. We're trying to keep that updated with what's going on. Follow us on socials, our Facebook and Twitter. We're most active there for any updates. And thank you once again for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.